If you or someone you know struggles with addiction, stay right here for the Recovery Boys. Lewis Finch and Macon Moy discuss alcoholism, drug addiction, co-occurring disorders, and life in recovery. And now, here's Lewis and Macon.
Good morning, Macon.
Good morning, Lewis.
I'm Lewis.
And I'm Macon.
And we are the Recovery Boys.
Yeah.
Nailed it again.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to the show today.
Yes, very much so.
We have one of our own with us today as our guest, Tiara, the clinical director here at Wellwind. So we're really looking forward to finding out how she got into this room with us.
Yes.
She drew the short straw, I guess is the best way to describe it. But she does so much work for us here. So why don't you tell us, Lewis, tell us a little bit about your history with Tiara?
So, well, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I know this is not something you really necessarily think about doing all the time, but I think what you all bring to the table is something that I think will help a great deal for people to understand what goes on clinically in Wellwind, but also to Macon's point, how you got here. I think we first met 2 years ago, roughly. And when you were running an outpatient program that ended up going out of business, and you were at that point I believe for a brief period of time, an individual therapist.
Correct.
And you were sent to us by a higher power, and ever since it's been wonderful to have you here. But if you could just briefly just kind of give us an idea as to why you got into this field. What was it? Because my understanding is if you go into this field in school, you start out as a generalist and then you become a specialist in most cases.
In most cases.
I mean, there are some people that do practice across all spectrums, but most do settle on one thing that they like best and seem to do best. And it'd be interesting to see from your standpoint why you've settled on this particular area. So if you don't mind, just fill everybody in.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Tiara, if we get started, I will we always say this to everybody that comes in. Jeff Georgia 2 weeks ago. The purpose of this podcast is for people who don't know what to do. You know, we want to become a resource.
Yes.
So we speak kind of in general terms. You know, this podcast is really more for parents or for people who are suffering, not for professionals who already know so much of what we know. You know, and Lewis and I talk about it all the time, the uninformed decisions that parents make or that spouses make or that families make with people in trouble. And so what we're hoping is that this podcast can become something where we'll just give them some general overview of how the process works.
Okay.
And so with that in mind, and you know, the great thing about this podcast is that we're not, we have a good time. So don't worry about, you can tell us anything you want to tell us, as long as it's going to help people. And that's what we're trying to do. We want this to be a resource for people.
Okay. Sounds good. So just a little bit about myself. So I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. And I've been in the field for 8 years. I started out in community mental health. And so I worked in a variety of different programs with children, adolescents, and adults. And then I worked for a few IOP programs, and then also I worked at a detox facility. And so I started out, so I'm not in recovery, but I'm a family member that's in recovery. My father was addicted, and so I watched the progression of the disease as he went through it. And then as a family member, I was exposed to what addiction can do and how it affects the family, and then how we as a whole family union was affected. And so that's what drove me to get in the field and want to help others.
Well, listen, I mean, that's one of the things that I think probably 80 or 90% of the people in our field are either in recovery or have a family member in recovery or have certainly been impacted individually, which we see so much of. But it does allow us, I think, to speak to the other people, the people that are listening. We understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most important thing.
Well,
for
and
us.
also, you brought up IOP. You mentioned, so for those that don't know, IOP stands for intensive outpatient, and it's a form of treatment that is in the hierarchy of addiction treatment. It's about 3 rungs down the ladder.
Correct.
In that it doesn't require you to go somewhere and stay for a period of time. You actually can get help while you're living at home and you're working and you're interacting with family and friends, which I think we've found to be the key to getting people over the hump. We see a lot of folks who come from residential treatment and somehow think they're going to be fixed by a short 28, 30-day stint, and that we all know that's not the case. You also brought up the fact that you started out in, did you say public mental health?
Community mental health. Mm-hmm.
Explain what that looks like.
Okay.
Because I think it's important they understand the difference between what we do and what's available out there as well.
Mm-hmm. So community mental health is working with individuals who receive state-funded services who are uninsured or underinsured. And so it's more people with lower, that have less resources.
Okay. And these are folks that could be on Medicaid, Medicare possibly?
Correct.
Or even those that don't have any insurance whatsoever.
Right, and state-funded.
And is that population small, large? Is it?
Large. It's a large population.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Very large population.
And I think that's one of the things that we hear, especially with the COVID thing that's happened, the pandemic, the number of mental illness or mental health problems. And I think that even the politicians now, and that it's always, mental health has always been a way to raise money for politicians, and there's a lot of lip service paid to it, but there's never any practical progress made on it. How many times do we hear people say, I don't know what to do? I'm
Right.
suffering from depression, I'm suffering from anxiety. And it really is, it's difficult. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to turn to. You don't know where to go to get help. And I think that's one of the, I've said it a million times and I absolutely mean it. When history looks back on our generation, we'll get an F for how we took care of our the mentally ill, because there's so much of it. And now this pandemic has increased the number of people who have anxiety and depression. And of course, we see in our space, mental illness leads to substance problems.
Absolutely.
Because people, they want to feel different, and alcohol and drugs immediately deliver that to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is they become their own doctor, self-medication, which we've heard. And then what happens, and it's the big flip, all of a sudden the substance abuse becomes the primary and the mental illness becomes the secondary. It started with the mental illness being the primary, but then it flips. And we see that so much. We really do. And so I think that it's unfortunate that people don't know what to do if they have a loved one who's suffering from mental illness. And we see it. I've had it in my family. I'm sure we all have.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And so, that's one of the things that we, I think at some point, hopefully that will get easier to figure out. What do we do for people?
So I do want to get back to this community mental health thing, because it alarms me, having heard the stories of people who come out of that system. Because my understanding is there aren't enough therapists to really go around. Is that true?
That's true.
So you're looking at people with caseloads of how many people in some cases?
30 plus sometimes.
So you're, as an individual therapist, you're expected to see 30 people on how frequent basis?
Weekly.
Weekly
On a
basis.
weekly basis.
And how many days a week are you normally working?
5 days a week.
5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 6 people a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes having to not only talk to them for at least an hour, right?
Correct.
Not to mention what all the other crises that may arise.
Right.
And then you have note taking to do, which I'm sure is because the government requires you to take a lot of notes, I'm sure, to
Yes.
make sure they continue.
Yes.
So, do you, this is going to be a rhetorical question, but do you see a lot of burnout in that field?
Absolutely. There's a lot of burnout with clinicians that are, because there's so many people in the within that population that need assistance, not enough clinicians to provide the services, or they're overworked a lot of the times. And it's not, that type of environment doesn't make, it's hard to give individualized good services when you have so many clients on your caseload, and you're overworked and overwhelmed.
I mean, Taylor, who worked, my wife who worked for us, she's back at First Health in Pinehurst. She sees 8 a day sometimes. She has 8 sessions today.
And hers are sometimes assessments, which take a lot longer than an hour.
2 assessments and 6 clinicals. Yeah, I mean, and she'll come home and she's drained. I talked to Lewis. We talked a little bit this morning about self-care.
Right.
How important it is that we don't become so inundated with helping people that we forget to help ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the most important thing, because we can only help people if we're in a good place.
Well, going back to that comment.
Right.
So you're seeing 30 people a week.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, how many folks, we have 4 clinicians plus you here, correct? On average, how many people are assigned per therapist here? On average.
On average, they have about 10 to 15 clients.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So that should give people an idea of the difference, a third to a half of what you're saying
in
community mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've run groups before in community health where I'm running groups of 25 people
In a
before.
group.
Mm-hmm.
Versus how many people in our groups typically?
We try to keep it between 6 to 10.
Okay.
And talk about that. Let's talk about, why is it important? It's because everybody in group needs to share. And if you only have an hour or 3 hours of IOP and you have 25 people, you can hide. People can hide in group and not talk.
Mm-hmm.
Or not get even if they do talk, they're, 24 other folks who are sitting back and waiting to either tell their story or get some help, and it just doesn't happen in a lot of cases because the time runs out, right?
Right. But then also you got people that are coming in with anxiety, depression, they're vulnerable, or they are fearful of being vulnerable. So when you have that many people in the room, they're not able to get that specialized individual attention that they need.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that separates us here at Wellwind, is we're certainly client focused, and we're not, because we're not we're a for-profit business that doesn't really. Most of the decisions we make aren't based on profitability; they're based on client service.
Correct.
And I would say that, and that's unusual. And I tell people, I spoke to somebody who reached out to us yesterday, and I tried to explain to her that we're client focused. That you're not gonna go and see the other spots in our area, and I think that you'll discover we're so much different, and that's by design.
Well, and to that point, the idea of having you on this week, by the way, was based in part on what happened earlier this week on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
We had one of our clients show up here.
Yes.
Heavily impaired. There was no way that he could have attended group. He could barely form a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And he needed we determined, and you guys jumped into this really quickly, determined that he needed a higher level of care.
He did.
He had been a chronic relapser. We had tried to work with him, but he just wasn't getting there. And so the team really jumped into to play and started we down a process where eventually, I think that started at 10 o'clock that morning, and by 10 o'clock that night, he had been transported to a residential treatment program by us. And
Right.
it just, but that'll give you an idea. I don't know that goes on in the community mental health field.
Typically it doesn't. No,
Well,
we're
and
not gonna.
Yes, certainly one of the owners getting on a plane and flying down never happens.
Right.
Most, and like I say, you'd have to come in here to understand, but, and that's prime example of some of the stuff we see here. But one of the questions that you always hear, and I had a Zoom call with some parents on Monday morning, and the thing that we hear more times than not is, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the hardest thing. What do we say to people? What do you say to people when they say, I don't know what to do? Because it's not like we got all the answers, but we do have experience. We understand the disease, but I think the most important thing to remember is that there's no right answer.
Well, and one of the reasons that we, when someone comes to us, either you or I meet with them initially, but we quickly hand them off to Tiara and or a member of her staff, because we want them to get a clinical assessment or an evaluation done, and they can determine at what level this person comes into us, which is critical to determine where they are in the process.
Right. And Macon, to your point, I don't think that you're right. We don't have all the answers, but I think that when they come in, that they don't feel alone, and we are so individually focused and team oriented that they know that they have a team of support.
I agree with that. And the other thing that I think we do a pretty good job of is that we don't make it about how much it's going to cost. That's not a big part of our conversation until we've gone through all the different steps and realized that this is a good fit for us. If it's not a good fit for us, if they don't belong in our program but they need help, we will help navigate them to the proper place. And the money conversation, at least in our business for here at Wellwind, comes well into the process. It's not the start of the process. And I think you go into most places, the first thing you got to do is fill out the paper and give them your credit card and your insurance. And if you can't pay, then the service stops.
Right.
And we just don't operate that way.
Well, and it's interesting. The two questions we always get asked. Everybody asks us, how long am I going to be here? How much does it cost?
I know.
And our answer is, we can't tell you.
That's right.
Because this disease, like all other chronic diseases, and we've mentioned this before, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, they're chronic diseases, which means they are treatable but never curable over a long period of time.
Yep.
I'm a good case in point. Drank and did drugs for 38 years, started at 13, ended at 51. You're not going to stop something like that in a 28, 30, 90, 120-day program. It just isn't going to happen. There's too much to learn to know what to do if something triggers you that would have triggered you in the past.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So as part of that, if you don't mind, just kind of go into, well, I tell you what, just first of all, so when someone comes in, when you meet with them and you talk with them, what are you looking for in your assessment?
So the first thing that I'm trying to figure out is whether or not they're medically stable to enter at this level of care, so intensive outpatient. Because some individuals come in, so I'm looking at withdrawal symptoms, so for intensive outpatient, it's little to no withdrawal symptoms. If we have to send them to detox or residential, then I look at their environment. Is their environment conducive to recovery? Who do they have around them? What does their support system look like? Then I look at the substance that they're using, what they're using, how long they've been using, the frequency of use. Have they ever had any prior treatment in the past? And I use those things to determine which level of care may be best for them.
Well, then here's one for you. You'll love this one. Mm-hmm. What happens if they don't tell you the truth? How can you possibly figure out what the real problem is in that initial assessment?
Well, a lot of the times I meet them where they're at. That's the thing too. Okay. And so if they're underreported, I feel like that eventually comes out. We don't send them away. We can take them in for individual therapy and work with them to explore their relationship with whatever their substance of choice is. And then if we find that it's more, then we can always increase their level of care to intensive outpatient. And a lot of the times that happens. But we don't turn people away.
Okay.
I know it's hard for people out there watching this to believe that people wouldn't be honest about how much they're drinking or doing drugs. But just think about yourself. Whenever I used to laugh when they do the different alcohol screening test. The numbers that people give. We had a great, two really good friends at my club when I was in active addiction, and they were both horrendous alcoholics. You know, they were the bar lounge guys.
Right.
And one I went in for a physical, and of course, the doctor says, "Well, how much do you drink?" And you know, my buddy gave him some number that was completely underreporting what he really drank. And then the next day, one of his buddies asked him, you know, what'd you say to the doctor when he asked you how much you drink? He said, what'd you say? You know, so it became a competition almost, and it was hilarious. But it's not. You know, you can't. Honesty, we talk about it all the time. Recovery is based on honesty. And one of the things that we do here at Wellwind, and we're very upfront with them, is to tell them that if they're not going to be honest with us, we're going to have a hard time really helping them if we don't really know what we're dealing with.
Right.
And let's face it, the family members that show up, they have no idea. They've been, I mean, the family members are the ones who know the least because they want to believe what their loved ones tell them. And you can't follow them around. There's not like a drink counter on their head and you can go and look at it. Or, you know, drugs or whatever. So, you know, I think that it's always interesting to me when I talk to a loved one, how scattered the information is. And that's one of the things that we try and do with our screenings, is to really get to know the level of problem that we have. But one of the things that I know Tiara's good at, and I know her staff's good at it, body English is a really good way of telling when somebody's telling the truth or not. When they start squirming or they won't look you in the face, they're probably not being honest with you. And so, Tiara, let me ask you something. What is it that you guys are seeing on the clinical side more over the last 2 years? Is there anything different that you're seeing that you haven't seen in the past? I mean, I know that from my perspective, from a screening perspective, we seem to have more alcohol problems than I've ever seen.
So we have a lot more alcohol problems, but I'm seeing, especially since the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, that we have a lot more young professionals who are entering the program or who are admitting that they have a substance use issue. Yeah,
and don't you think, I mean, Lewis, we talk about it all the time. They're working at home, you know, not in the office environment. There's no accountability.
Sure.
You know, and that's one of the things I think that we don't pat ourselves on the back as much as we should. We add a layer of accountability to our clients. You know, if they don't show up, it's not like we just check them off, and when we call them, hey, what are you doing? Where are you?
Right.
What's going on? And I think that the people, you would think it may be irritating, but I think most of them appreciate it. You know, that's what the one thing they lack in their life is the accountability.
I think the ones who are serious about their recovery, because as you know, you and I have talked about before, a lot of them are checking boxes in a lot of cases, and it doesn't help their recovery. I am interested to find out. So you mentioned younger. Are you seeing more numbers come in as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The numbers are increasing. And then also, in speaking to that, as far as what I'm seeing different, so there's a lot more. So alcohol is probably majority of our clients. But there's also new drugs coming in that are synthetic and that are legal, that you can buy over the counter. So we're seeing a lot more people come in, the younger crowd coming in with Kratom use.
I know, that's just
Delta
crazy to me.
8, and these are sold at smoke shops and readily available, and some of them are not even detected in drug screens. So we're seeing a lot.
So explain. It's interesting. While you're on, what is Kratom? Explain what Kratom is.
So Kratom is a synthetic opiate. It comes in powder forms. It comes in capsules. I have individuals who make it in teas, or who just take shots of it. But it's synthetic and gives opiate-like effects.
But it's over the counter.
It's over the counter.
Sold
it's
at convenience
addictive.
stores.
And it's, in some states, it's not legal. In some states, it is.
Mm-hmm.
In our state, it's legal. I mean, you can buy it. If you want it, you can buy it. And I got to tell you, I've never tried it, so I can't speak about that. But I am an opiate addict. and it's the same. It hits the same receptors in your brain as the opiates do.
Mm.
And I've been told by the people who have a problem with it that kratom's way more difficult to detox off of than opiates because you can always go and find it.
What about Delta? You mentioned Delta.
So Delta 8 is synthetic cannabis, and it's a strand off from regular THC. And so it still produces mood altering effects, and it's also sold over the counter. And so that you can get in gummies, you can get it actually like the flower, but people use it just as they would use marijuana.
And it's not illegal.
It's not illegal.
Okay.
Let's face it. I mean, our government they just, they say that there's a war on drugs, but nobody really fights it. I mean, it goes from administration to administration, and the bureaucracy is so thick, you never really get anything accomplished. And so it's out there. I mean, all these things are out there, but I can't tell you how many parents that I have a conversation with. They think it's pretty cool that their kids using kratom. I have no idea what it is.
Right.
It's not illegal.
That's the point.
Mhm.
Neither's alcohol. And I always tell them that. I said, well, alcohol's not illegal, but there's a lot of more people die from alcoholism than any other disease. If they really went in and started looking at what killed somebody, and for me, like if I'd have died in 2012 when I was in the hospital, it would have been from organ failure. But the organ failure was created by alcoholism, but it wouldn't have been characterized an alcohol death, but that's what it was. So if the real numbers ever came out, I mean, alcohol in this country kills more people than anything else. I mean, it just does. And we're seeing more and more and more of that. Tiara, let me ask you something. And I'm sure you get the same phone calls that Lewis and I get. When somebody calls you and says, what do? What do you say to them? I mean, that's always the hardest thing, I think, that interaction is. Parents are worried about their children, or the husband's worried about the wife, or the wife's worried about the husband, and they don't know what to do. And so that's what we want to be, a source of information. And so I think we do a pretty good job, but what do you say to them? I mean, because there's no right way to do it, right? I mean, everybody's different.
Right. So the first thing is to get them in. I think it's important to have them in person. And as far as the families, love, encouragement, and support. There's nothing that they didn't cause it, they didn't create it, they can't change it. And so it's getting them in and providing education for them and how to set boundaries, how to take care of themselves, and how to support their loved ones. And so I think we do a pretty good job at that. We offer family therapy. We have a family psychoeducation program so they can receive their own support.
And that psychoeducational part is open to multiple families at one time, right?
Absolutely.
So it allows them to hear the stories of other folks who've been through what we're going through.
Yeah.
How often is that offered here?
So that's every other Wednesday, and from 6 to 8 p.m.
Okay. And you mentioned family therapy. What does that look like here?
So it's as needed. The clinicians, when a client first starts, the clinicians automatically reach out to the family member that the client wants to be a part of their treatment within the first 2 weeks. And we just offer ongoing support. They know how to contact us. They know that they're able to come in. It's unlimited in regards to the sessions that they can have.
And we want to do this why. I think people need to understand the why behind why we don't just willy-nilly do all this.
No, because it's a family disease. And
Right.
so everyone around that person is affected, and they need support and help themselves.
That is such a good point. And I think that sometimes, we get back to the self-care, the parents can sometimes fail to realize that they're suffering the same kind of trauma. Their trauma is different, but it's the same thing, and that they need his help as much as anybody.
Right.
I mean, one of the great Al-Anon's one of the great programs, because it addresses the family, not the alcoholic, but the family of the alcoholic, and it's so important, that support. The one thing I will say about Wellman that makes us so different, if you pick up the phone here, you're gonna get a live voice.
Right.
We're gonna answer the phone, and we're gonna immediately. I mean, if we get somebody looking for us online, and we get an email from them asking for something, it's usually 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and we're right back to them. And you won't find that in most places.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, you call, and by the time you figure out what button to hit, I'm fed up with it, and I hung up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, I'm having to deal with all these healthcare people now, and trying to get somebody on the phone that's got any kind of real information is damn near impossible.
Yeah,
It
And
is.
it drives me crazy. It really does. It's irritating. And I think that when people are in crisis, they need to hear that voice. And they need to hear that
Well,
somebody really cares about
And
what
that's-
they're saying.
That's a good example of what happened on Monday.
It is.
Because we all came in with other things to do,
Yes.
right? We pretty much dropped everything we were doing because we had one person who was in real crisis.
Yeah.
And the entire staff jumped into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's all hands on deck when those type of situations happen. And then a lot of feedback that I get from clients that do come in is someone answered the phone. Lewis told me to come in
Mhm.
the same day and met with me the same day, or Shannon offered support and was just the kind voice that I needed to hear. And so that's the type of services that you get.
And the reason we do that, quite frankly, is because no one else is doing it.
Well, also, when we were in trouble, that's what we needed.
Yeah.
And we recognized that
Yeah.
we couldn't find it. I know that once people, and we, listen, I mean, the number of referrals we get are always based on our response level.
Right.
I mean, we certainly have we have a great clinical staff here.
Mhm.
All of our clinicians are amazing. And they're all very, very dedicated, not just to getting paid, but to helping people. I mean,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, that's what really brings them in here. But I'm telling you, you can't imagine if you have a child in trouble, if you have a wife or a husband and you don't know what to do, speaking to somebody and getting real information it's amazing
Well,
how it gives them a little bit of hope.
yeah. Well, everybody's website really looks nice.
Well, I had,
yeah, except ours.
as a matter of fact, I would argue that the ones who have the fanciest websites are sometimes the ones that are trying the hardest to hide what they really got going
Yes.
on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, couple questions. First of all, you mentioned briefly about length of care. Can you talk about why one of our approaches is we don't timeline recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and then how that looks like from within if you're a client. Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, so when a client comes in, we don't give them a set date of when they're going to finish, because recovery is long term and we don't know exactly what they're coming in with. And so they're what they need is assessed on an ongoing basis. And so some people need, from the normal 90-day IOP, some people need longer than that. They need more support than that. And so it's just evaluated on a week by week basis.
And then once someone successfully completes the intensive outpatient portion, what is left up? What's the next step for them at that point?
So we have a continuing care program, and we offer our groups 4 days a week. We tell clients once they come on that they're welcome to stay as long as they need to stay. And so we want to see them here for at least a year, if not longer. But they continue with individual therapy. They continue with family therapy as needed. They have their continuing care program. And so it's just ongoing for as long as they need it.
Well, and we did that initially. When we first opened up, I heard a stat that said if you could get somebody in recovery and they could be in that recovery for at least a year, there was a very good chance, and the number was thrown at me, of about 80% of the people that are in recovery for at least a year can stay in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that number came from. But we've actually had people, because of our continuing care model, who have been with us for 2 and 3 years.
We do. Mm-hmm. We have a person right now who's been with us for 3 years.
And that's because he likes the format that we do here. The continuing care groups are what, an hour and a half?
Hour. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have 4, like you said, we have four of those during the course of the week. The other thing I wanted to ask you, because you obviously have been around, you've got a staff of 4 folks.
Mm-hmm.
How does that staff match up with what other staffs you've had to deal with before?
Well, our staff. Well, we have senior staff members, so they're seasoned. We have seasoned clinicians. Our clinicians have also been in leadership roles, and then they are intensively trained in different modalities, and so they're not fresh out of school. They have experience, and they've worked in different areas within the field, and so I say they come with a lot of experience.
And you don't necessarily see a lot of that at the community level, right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of fresh out of school clients or clinicians typically
Cool.
are getting their footing within the
Well,
field.
listen, this is, we said it when I went back to school to get my master's in addiction counseling. They're very upfront that if you're in this to see how much money you can make, you probably need to think about doing something different.
Right.
I mean, this is a field that pays a decent wage, but it's not a field where you're gonna make a ton of money. But you do impact people, and so I think that's probably the most important thing for us, right?
Mhm.
Is that I don't think we view success in dollars and cents. It's just how many people we actually help.
right.
And we do that here more so than any place I've ever been. And I've been in and out of treatment, hospitals, and I can tell you that our client focus versus profit focus is easy to see quickly if you come into our place. And we always ask people, it's funny, people shop us. They do. We instead of asking them not to leave and don't go look at other places, we actively send them to other places because we know when they come back, they're going to be shaking their head and say, "Oh my God."
Well, and there are good programs around the area, but and I'm biased as hell because this is my program. I should be biased. I think we do the best work.
Yeah.
Particularly for our population.
I absolutely agree with you.
And it's but the other intensive outpatient programs in the area also serve a purpose for a specific group of people.
That's right.
And in fact, it's ironic, one of our biggest folks we refer to the most is probably one of our biggest competitors because they fit a certain demographic and a need that we simply do not take care of.
Right.
And we want to be good neighbors. We want to be good, period, because this is a life and death issue to deal with.
It absolutely is. And I think we probably do as good a job as anywhere making people understand how serious this is. And the support we give to families is as important as the support we give the person who comes in. And so, I know the number of conversations that we all have with family members. That's not something that most people even talk about.
Right.
And it's very important for us that everybody is pulling the same direction when we're dealing with these folks. And we do. I mean, the great thing about having a small company like this is that we can do what we want to. We don't really have to run it past anybody other than the people sitting in this room.
Right. Yeah.
We can make decisions, and we can make them immediately. And we don't have to say, well, let me think about it. We usually make a decision, and I would say 100% of the time it's always client focused. It's not business focused.
Well, in that regard, I do want to ask Tiara one last question. So you've been with multiple programs. You've been with multiple companies before.
Yes.
What do you think sets us apart from those other folks used? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't want you to say anything negative about any of those other programs. Just what is it that separates us from the rest of the pack?
I think our response time and our genuine willingness to want to help and go above and beyond to help.
I think that's
exactly what I was thinking too.
Well, but if there's a mission statement for Wellman, that's what it is. I mean, to be immediate and impactful, and that's what we are. I mean, we're immediate, and listen. We've all set in, and the great thing about not having a lot of rules is you don't have to figure out how to break them. You're better off not to have rules.
Right.
We're client focused. If we can do something to help somebody, we always do.
We do.
We don't ever say no. At least since I've been here. And I think that it's hard to find business, especially in this space, that's not just the opposite. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that, or I'm sorry, your insurance doesn't allow this, or whatever. And those conversations never take place in this office.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons that we have been successful. But I think it's also one of the reasons that we look forward to coming in here every day.
Right.
It's really way more than a job for us.
Mm-hmm.
It really is, and so.
And I think that we all work really well together. You know, again, what happened Monday, all hands were on deck. It wasn't, this is your client, you deal with it. It was a phone call made out. We were all in communication. We all showed up for that client, and we got him where he needed to be.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So, Lewis, it's been an excellent show. Tara?
Well, here's one other thing I want to add to this because it just reminded me of this. And it hasn't always been the case here, but I believe that, and as I should, we have the best staff. And when you have people, and it's taken me years as a business owner to understand this, if you get the folks on board in your company that you really need, you don't have to sit back and worry about what's going to be going on. Mm-hmm. I told you this yesterday. I took yesterday off, and I felt bad. I felt like I don't know why. I felt like I was, I don't know, letting me down. I wasn't letting you guys down. You love it when I'm not here. I understand. I'm a pain in the butt. I do the least amount of work here. And that's what is true, but that's okay. And thank you for saying that. But I don't have to worry about that anymore.
That's exactly right.
I've got folks here. I mean, Tara's a great example of that, but I can go person by person here, and I don't have to worry about what comes out of their mouths. I don't have to worry about if they take a phone call, what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. They know exactly. I mean, literally everybody here, and it's a really good feeling to know.
You know, one of the things when I've been so blessed in my life to have been some parts of some really neat teams. I had a radio station in Charlotte it was just, and you'll still have people who worked, you know, they didn't work for me, they worked with me when we were in Charlotte. Say, I've never experienced anything like that, you know. But one of the things that you would never hear from my staff in Charlotte, and you'll never hear from this staff here, is that's not my job. Right. You don't ever hear anybody say that. Right. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not my job. Nobody does that here. We all do everything. I mean, if we need to clean the bathroom, we clean the bathroom, and it doesn't matter who it is. And so I think that spirit is what people feel when they come into the rooms. And so if you're here for help and you know you're around people who will do anything to help you, that's just a nurturing environment. And I think that's probably the greatest thing that we serve here is the environment that we create, you know, because everybody here is always client focused.
Well, we're also open. I don't know if this has been stressed enough. We know that we never close. This is a 24-hour day job.
That's right.
7 days a week, holidays, birthdays, it just doesn't matter. And you've got to be.
Well, and let's I mean, recovery's the same way. Recovery's a 24-hour day job too. You don't recovery's not one of those things that you do 8 hours a day. If you're in recovery, you do it 24/7.
Right.
And so it's easy for us who work in this business to do that. You know, we take phone calls at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. If somebody's calling you 2 o'clock in the morning, they need some help. And so what you don't take that time to think, well, this is a pain in my butt. You know, you're more concerned, what can I do to help you? And I think everybody here that works here, top to bottom, has that attitude. And I think that's what separates us from everybody else.
Well, and the other thing is, it's taken me a long time to understand this, but if you bring the right people into your company who are better than you are at a certain project, it makes your job a whole lot easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Tara is one of those people. Absolutely.
Listen, we're fortunate. Everybody that works with us is that way. And if you know what, we've had our share of people who'd like to join us, and we know if it's a fit or it's not a fit. Right. And I think we're always very honest about that. So, I mean, that's one of the things that makes Wellland such an interesting place to work. And let's face it, all the people who come in here, we've had people always recently, business guys, hey, we should franchise this. We should do this. And I just kind of look at them and I was like, you just don't get it, do you? You can't, there's some things you can't franchise, you know?
You can try.
Well, I think
it'd be a horrible mistake. But
but also you want to, I always used to, you know, when we sold our station, we had a new owner in Charlotte. They ended our fund and turned it into a business. and all of a sudden nobody wanted to be there anymore. And so you got to be careful. I mean, it's hard to find things like this, situations like this. And so it's just so much more fun. Listen, I enjoy every time I come in here. It's always something going on that I enjoy doing. I think everybody that works here would say the same thing. So, well, thanks, Tiara. You rock.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. Anybody out there who's watching?
Was this that bad? Did you enjoy this a little bit?
I did enjoy it. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah. Well, we should
have
have it. Maybe in the future, what we should do is we should bring all the clinicians in, do a round table, and talk about.
That'd be really cool.
Talk about what we're seeing. What what's a good idea? Listen, there's no bad idea when you're trying to help people. There's no bad idea. I mean, sometimes maybe some of the things that we want to do, we need to be backed off a little bit, but. As long as we're trying to help people, it's never really been a bad idea. So if you want to find out more about what we do here, go to wellwin.com or you go to recoveryboys.com and we have a link to Wellwin. And so, Lewis, thanks once again. Another great podcast. I'm sure at some point all the awards will come our way.
I'm just waiting for them.
Yeah, we do have a lot of room on our shelves up there since we don't have any so far.
Yes.
I'm Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we're
the Recovery Boys.
Thanks, everybody. Go to therecoveryboys.com. This show will be posted quickly. Terry, our crack team here, will make sure that it's out. Terry's amazing. And we will see you again next week on the Recovery Boys. Lewis?
Thank you, Macon.
Thank you, Lewis.
I will
and
see
Will,
you
thank
next
you, buddy.
week.
All right. Thanks so much.
Guys.
Good night, everybody.
Mama, take this badge from me, 'cause I can use it anymore.